Hi guys and girls, I'm Obsidian Ant. Today I want to talk about the engineers. In particular, I want to talk about the materials collecting process. Now, since this patch has been released, there's been quite a few controversial issues surrounding it, perhaps more for this patch than any other patch released so far for the game. Some of those issues have been the difficulty increase surrounding the AI, another has been the rather heavy loaded RNG within the game, that's the random number generation. And of course, there's also this issue with the materials collecting. Now, as usual with this, I'll talk a bit about the issue itself, and then I'll talk about some of the perceived good sides and some of the perceived negative sides, and then at the end I'll talk a little bit about my own thoughts on the matter. So, for those not entirely familiar with the situation, what is it all about? Well, materials are items that are located by players through various gameplay activities, and they are required in order to craft or upgrade your various modules or weapons on board your ship. Now, of course, you don't actually do this crafting process yourself. There are various engineers dotted around the galaxy that do that on your behalf, and you have to rank up with them and increase your reputation with them in order to get them to do these upgrades. Upgrades come in various tiers. They start at the lowest at grade 1, which are the easiest to get, and work their way up to grade 5, which are the most beneficial to you, but also the materials for them are the hardest to get. Anyone who's played a game over the past decade or so should recognise this type of game mechanic. It's fairly ubiquitous amongst all game genres. So, of course, the materials themselves come in various grades. You get the completely common materials, tier 1 materials, that are very easy to find, all the way up to, I believe, tier 5 materials, which are much harder to find. With these materials then, Frontier have done a very interesting thing. They've actually made them findable within all the gameplay elements of the game. Whether you're into combat and like destroying NPCs, or whether you just like to drive across the surface of planets, or if you like to go mining, you'll eventually come across materials. NPCs drop them as loot. They're found on the surface of planets, and they drop out of asteroids when you're mining. You can also find them in unidentified signal sources and get them as mission rewards as well. In fact, nearly everything you do within Elite will one way or another result in you getting some materials. So what is the issue at hand then? What has got people up in arms about it? What has got people defending this system to the hilt? Well, as with many things relating to Elite, it all comes down to player guidance, or the lack of it, and the rather heavy RNG systems involved. Whilst the material details, the information on each material will tell you roughly where you can go to obtain these particular materials. Take arsenic for example, it will tell you can find this on planets or in asteroids. It doesn't exactly tell you any more than that. And what this results in is players either scratching their head, giving up in frustration, or spending hours running around in circles trying to locate what they actually need. Whilst arsenic may say it's available on planets, it doesn't tell you what type of planet it's available on. There are many different types of planet in Elite. Turns out you can find them on high metal content planets, but you can't find them on all metal content planets. Some of them you just drive around for hours and you'll never find the stuff. So it's very difficult to use either logic or game knowledge in order to find what you're looking for. But to be perfectly fair, this doesn't apply to all materials or data. If you're looking for something like high wake echoes, you can find them just by scanning high wakes outside stations, and you'll get the data needed after 3 or 4 scans. They seem to be very common and very easy to get, and of course logical to find. But overall, this system really has caused a lot of divided opinions. So let's have a look at just what a couple of those opinions are on both sides of the table. So let's start with the good. The principle of tying all of this material collection into the engineers themselves is very good. It's the fact that every single game loop will eventually feed back into the engineers. It does add depth to the game, adds breadth to the game, and generally speaking, it feels quite rewarding when you find a rare material, especially if it's an item you haven't been looking for but just come across it and you think, hey, that's one of the rarest materials in the game. That was brilliant, just finding that. And of course, this system means you can simply just sit down and play the game to gain the materials and data that you're looking for. If you're into combat, well, just go out there and do some combat. You're going to come across materials. If you're into driving over the surface of planets, well, go and do that, because there's plenty of the stuff dotted over at the planets everywhere. And if you just like doing missions or dropping into unidentified signal sources, there too, you're also going to find various materials. So basically, as you play the game, the idea is that you will find the materials that you need. It's also true that this isn't particularly difficult gameplay. So long as you have the time, then eventually you will be able to get the top tier upgrades. Theoretically then, this system doesn't bar any people from getting the upgrades that they want, because it's not based on player skill, it's just based on time investment. And to a degree, as some of these materials and data do have an element of logic and game knowledge behind them. If you think of shield emissions, then you can think, well, if I just scan a ship, then probably I'll get some data on shield emissions, and true enough, that's exactly what happens. So all in all, these elements and a few others I think are what make people support this. It's what gives the game a bit more life. It's what's added vastly to Elite Dangerous with the Engineers update. I completely agree that it gives a sense of purpose and a sense of direction to the game, and it basically ties everything together quite neatly in fact. But there is another side to it. Unfortunately, this system forces players to engage in gameplay that they may not usually do or enjoy. So the notion that you can just simply play the game, whilst true for perhaps certain upgrades, is certainly not true for all upgrades. For example, some of the materials you can only find on the surface of the planets, and if you don't enjoy driving the SRV, well, you're going to be stuck driving the SRV for quite probably many hours at a time before you eventually get the very rare drops. It's also not entirely clear where to find certain materials, and like I used with the example of arsenic early on, I had this particular problem myself. Now, arsenic is only a grade 2 material, but it seems to drop very rarely. The tooltip just says go to planets or check asteroids, so if you do go to planets, you could spend a lot of time just driving around. Perhaps you go to a rocky planet, and you're probably not going to find any arsenic there. You can go to a high metal content planet, and chances are you may well find some arsenic, but there's no guarantee. Firstly, that's due to the RNG nature. This stuff doesn't spawn very often. But secondly, it's due to the fact that the game doesn't actually give you any information on where to go. Now, I'm sure no one's asking to be handheld, no one's asking for any glowing light directing you to exactly what you want, but a little bit of information, a little bit of guidance isn't too much to ask for, and this sort of information should be available in the game. Players shouldn't be dependent on out-of-game resources for that. I think it just feels a little bit awkward for some people to drive around on a planet and not find the material they want, and not knowing whether that's because they're on the wrong planet or just because simply the RNG hasn't rolled them the correct number yet. And this is very true for all materials in the game, whether you're hunting NPCs and hoping they're going to drop a specific material for you, or whether you're mining inside an asteroid field hoping that eventually a correct material is going to drop out of the rock. You've got no guarantee of actually knowing you're in the right location, at least until you actually find what you want. And of course, there's the whole challenging gameplay thing. I don't think anyone can actually argue that this is particularly challenging gameplay. There's no real skill involved. It just requires simple time investment. If you've got the time, eventually you're going to get there. And I think for some people that feels quite unrewarding. So there are many sides to this argument, both for and against. I've only covered a few points here, but some of these are the most popular ones. So what do I think of all this myself? Well, I actually feel kind of torn with the Engineers. It's an absolutely fantastic update that has delivered a lot of positive stuff to the game, but it's also got some huge downsides that could quite well force me to not bother playing too much with the Engineers themselves. The number one problem being that it takes far too long. Now please understand, I'm not saying getting these upgrades should be a quick process. I'm quite happy for it to take months or even a year to get the top tier upgrades. But what I don't like is that it's all underpinned by randomness. I don't enjoy going into a ring system to mine, or going into a planetary surface to look for materials, or even starting hunting NPCs without knowing I'm doing the correct thing. Now by all means, when I'm in the correct location, make it take some time, but don't have me chasing my tail without the sure knowledge that I'm actually spending my time wisely. Now, how Frontier give me that information is entirely up to them. I sure as heck don't want to be guided to that information. I don't want my hand held. I'd like to be able to use my skills. I'd like to be able to use my knowledge of the game to find that information. Allow me to use my knowledge of star makeup and planetary composition to determine what sort of system is most likely to have a specific type of material. And then once I'm there, by all means throw the RNG to determine how long it's going to take me to actually find that material. Now this one may be a bit of a curve for Frontier and difficult for them to implement due to the nature of the player base, but I'd also like certain things to be skill based as well. And I appreciate that not everyone is good at the game. I certainly aren't good at combat. But, you know, it'll be quite nice to drop into a certain unidentified signals source and find a particularly difficult ship to destroy, and that ship only drops the very rare materials. So added to the fact that those materials are difficult to find, it actually requires player skill to actually obtain them as well. Like many others, I'm also curious about the data and materials limit. I'm not really sure what purpose this serves in terms of gameplay, and whilst I appreciate that Frontier has actually doubled the limit recently, it all seems to be rather arbitrary and not really serve any purpose other than to gate us away from certain content. I guess the only real purpose there is, from a development point of view, is to stop players going to the engineers with a whole stack of materials and just sit there doing roll after roll of upgrades. Personally, I feel that the removal of these limits would be a huge benefit to everyone. In fact, there's many suggestions that players have come up with. There's many suggestions and examples of changing the gameplay a little bit that I've thought of myself that could make things a little bit better and improve the overall process. The few I mentioned there are just some of them, and there are many others on the forums and various other places over the internet. For me, it's not about the time investment. The longer it takes, perhaps, the better. What it is about is feeling as though I haven't wasted my time, and that the gameplay I involve myself in is rewarding and challenging. Like I say, overall I think the Engineers is a positive step forward for Elite, and I think with the Engineers themselves, Frontier have laid some really good foundations for making a good crafting system. It's good work and a great update, but I can't help but feel that the people who believe that materials are a little bit too awkward to find, I've got a point. It's not about the difficulty, it's not about the time. It's about not knowing what the heck to do, and it's about not knowing whether or not the materials themselves are actually going to drop. I know Frontier are listening to all the feedback on this, and I suspect quite probably they're open to a degree of compromise on how this system works. So whilst I think the Engineers is a great foundation for the game overall, I think it just needs a slight nudge to make sure it goes in the correct direction. And for me, that direction is ensuring player autonomy within the game and ensuring that the overall experience feels rewarding and a worthwhile time investment. So I've expressed my thoughts and feelings on this, I've covered a few of the community's thoughts and feelings on this from both sides of the coin, and I've made some suggestions on what I feel could be done to improve things while still using the game systems that are already present within the game. I know also there are a whole load of other suggestions out there on the forums, and if you want to put some thoughts and feelings and suggestions and your opinions down in the comment section of this video, I'd love to hear from you. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll catch you guys and girls next time. Hi guys and girls, I'm Obsidian Ant and I'm back here with Elite Dangerous. Today I'm going to have a look at one of the Engineers, in particular Felicity, and I want to upgrade my FSD. Now I'm going to have a look here at what materials I actually need, and then I'm going to head out and collect them, and we'll see all the various locations that we actually need to go to in order to obtain those particular materials.